All right, and away we go. Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm Jonathan Honig. Delighted that you joined me today, and we have a wonderful co-host, Mr. Mark Pellegrino. He's an actor. I also think, Mark, I consider you an advocate and an activist. You know, when people think of an activist, they think of like Daryl Hannah being chained to some nuclear power plant. Oh, I'm an activist. But you're really an activist, and you're a knowledgeable activist about objectivism. Of course, we're here on behalf of the Ayn Rand UK Center, which is a wonderful association. I'm glad you're following them on Facebook and everywhere else on social media. I actually had the pleasure of visiting the center and Rosie Ginsburg and doing a speaking tour about a year and a half ago to really great, very boisterous crowds, big and small, and everything from universities to small pubs. So follow what the Ayn Rand Center is doing, support what they're doing, because they're really reaching out when it comes to what matters, which is ultimately ideas. And Mark, that's what you are. You're an activist and an advocate for ideas. That's what moves the world, and that's why I'm delighted to be sharing the screen with you today.
Well, thank you. Maybe one day I'll be as good an advocate as you, and so I'm delighted to be sharing the screen with you.
Well, you know, Rand said, when someone said, you know, what can ultimately one do to change the world? I'm paraphrasing, but her one-word answer was speak. And for better or maybe worse, that's what we're going to talk about today. A lot of people were speaking, or at least shouting, today at the service honoring and the memorial for recently departed Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump went to pay their respects. You know, there was some question about whether they would even show up. They did, to a very hushed crowd. But that crowd wasn't hushed for too long. So we're gonna talk a bit about this. You know, Mark, today is not our day normally to talk about politics, and whatever side of the aisle you come down on, it's troubling tape. It was very difficult tape, I think, to watch as an American, as a lover of liberty, as a lover of a lot of these institutions, the Supreme Court just being one of them. It was a very difficult moment of history.
So, yeah, I do think that we're in pretty dark times. I think that notions of civility, which traditionally fall on, traditional notions of how we should behave around one another and how we should treat solemn occasions, seem to be out the window now. Those aren't even guideposts to determining how we should behave anymore. What do you think?
All right, but I'll jump in, I'll play devil's advocate. You know, Ayn Rand was not a conservative. And some might say, oh, Mark, you're just a typical Hollywood conservative. You love the old ways. So look, Trump has violated rights. Why shouldn't people speak out when they see him? Why shouldn't they? You know, they weren't saying burn him down. They were saying vote him out. So isn't that the public speaking out?
It is in one respect, but should you have sex in supermarket aisles? No, there's a time and a place for everything, isn't there? There's a time for social protest, which is valid with a president like this who seems to have no understanding for or respect for constitutional limitations. And there's a time where a solemn occasion like this sort of requires that we get together and pay our respects to the passing of a very, very great human being, even though we may not agree with her, what her opinions were. Her achievements were beyond question, and that is what should be honored.
Yes,
that's the most important thing, to put aside the grievance for that.
There's a primacy. You know, Rand talks a lot of this primacy of consciousness, primacy of existence. You know, just in terms of how we conduct ourselves, it seems to be emotion that just drives it all. And, you know, look, I haven't been in school for, let's see, well, I'm 29 now, so I'm a lot older than that, obviously. So I don't know what's being taught, but I get the sense that there's this culture that just, whatever you feel, go with it. And if you feel wronged, lash out. And even if it's in the middle of, as you said, a pretty solemn circumstance. Look, I disagreed with a lot of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's positions, but as you said, I mean, a really kind of amazing woman, an amazing story, and someone, if I had a daughter, you'd certainly want her to grow up and be like this person and admire this person for a lot of reasons. So so it's everything from not booing the president all the way up to the traditional leftists of like, you're angry, go smash a Starbucks. Why? Because you felt like it. And that's cool. So there's just that primacy of emotion. And, you know, without reason, it always comes down to fists and just lashing out. That's what I find so troubling. And it's dark for that reason.
Well, how ironic is it that many of the people who are in that crowd booing him would accuse Trump of malignant narcissism, when that's exactly what's happening in the crowd. They themselves are putting their feelings above all of the content, the entire occasion, the solemnity of the occasion, to vent and to narcissistically make it about themselves as opposed to about Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a trolling display, and I have a horse in this race, if you will, because, and I know we both do, we love this country. We really love it, and we don't have to wear a flag all the time and walk around, we don't have to wave it, but like, I know we really love this country. I was honored to, help participate in writing or editing a book about this country, and Ayn Rand loved this country. So to see it, in pieces of it, as you said, so roundly disrespected, the rule of law disrespected, whether it's in the streets and, to me, property damage. I mean, it is painful, when you see, Mark, when you see businesses trashed. Like, look, it's not my business. I don't think there's this idea of, insurance covers it all. So, of course, it's not easy for these people, but that's disgusting for me to see, just the same way that it is disgusting when you see, as you said, a protest of this sort with Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I'm sorry, hold on one second. I have a bit of an emergency.
All right, it's good. We've got, let me see, it's Michael Eisner he's getting back in the game, and Mark is his #1 call, not surprisingly. He's a huge talent. Well, it comes down to this idea basically of Americanism. And this should not be synonymous with conservatism by any regards, because Rand she wrote what she called an obituary for conservatism. But there is and should be a respect for Americanism.
Oh, so sorry.
And some of those basic traditions. And that seems to be lost, because it's always emotion first, Mark, as we said, and reason last. You're not going to convince anyone of your side by disrespecting ultimately. So look, I have a lot of qualms with the president, but booing in this type of environment, it just kind of, Rand talked about the cultural bankruptcy of our age, and it's just such a tough time, I think, to love this country, given what a wasteland of politics had become.
So what's the difference between
shit show? But I know I'd be bleeped on this program.
So, but what's the difference between an objectivist orientation towards Americanism and a conservative's jingoistic orientation towards Americanism? I hope I didn't miss an explanation, because I had to deal with an emergency.
Thankfully, I don't know, because I really actively look. I don't want to turn this into my particular politics, but I really have actively disassociated myself with conservative thinkers for a long time, not even based on Rand's recommendation, but based on how boring the explanations and ultimately justifications always were. They were ultimately, in my experience, an appeal to authority, appeal to the greater good. And at the same time, at least I, as a young thinker, was discovering objectivism, thinking, no, it's not the greater good. It's about me and my life. And that's that American spark, I think, that's always driven this country. And so the idea of loving the American process, including small d democracy, and not having to disrespect the president at a public event, I just think, we need a generation of old grandmothers to kind of wash some kid's mouth out with soap, if you will, because that nature of decorum, I think, has just been tossed out. And that's what's so troubling to see as someone, I think, who loves America.
For sure, but now how do you marry that concept that what makes America unique and exceptional is its primacy of the individual, the me notion of it that exists nowhere else in the world? How do you say that that's different from what the crowd was doing. Certainly the people in the crowd were saying, my feelings matter more than this solemn occasion. My protest against this president matters more than this solemn occasion. He has no right to be here because of what he represents, and I'm going to make my feelings known about it. How do you marry these two?
Well, it's funny. I mean, people should watch all of the Ayn Rand Donahue clips, but there's one that I remember where I don't know if it's a protester or someone who was there to just screw with her. And she's like, next, she's like, this is my show. And someone disrespecting, I would say, someone disrespecting that environment in any way with a political protest is violating the property rights of whoever's putting on that thing. They're there as guests of that environment. And I think to shout out in such an environment, it's just as disrespectful as to shout out in the middle of a show that maybe, a movie, you don't like the ending, you don't like the actor, you don't shout out in the middle of a movie you're in and say, oh, Mark Pellegrino, he's such a greedy SOB. You say, hey, I'm in a movie theater. You're in a friggin' memorial for a great woman. So hold your tongue for a moment. It's certainly not illegal, but it's just so uncouth. And it's just all about your emotion. And I'm repelled by that, whether you're for America or against.
So how do rights fit into that? So these people feel like they are expressing their inherent right to protest. So how do rights fit into this spectrum of respect for the other and this sense of civility? Because clearly the people who are walking into Walmarts and getting mad because they have to put on a mask, proclaiming their right to not wear a mask, are somewhat similar to the people who are screaming at this rally, even though they're on opposite sides of the political spectrum. So what is it about rights that they're misunderstanding?
Well, Rand actually talks a lot about, she was, I don't want to ever speak ever on behalf of Ayn Rand, but she talks a lot about various forms of protest, and she was against a lot of them, kind of the whole picket line. And again, not speaking for her, but just to broadly summarize it, I think it was a question of property rights. Like, you don't have a right to block the streets. Now, look, the streets should be owned by someone else, but you don't have a right to block. The streets are there for people to get to work and get to bed. They're there to move. So even the right, your free speech is not this unlimited right to just do whatever you want, to say whatever you want without consequence. And she talks extensively about that. But it's like, to me, it comes down to this basic issue of property rights. They don't own that area. They're being disruptive. They're being ugly SOBs at the same time. But you know what? They're also being disruptive to what ultimately is a private event, and they should be escorted out and just looked down upon. I mean, there was a similar thing a couple of years ago when someone was at the Supreme Court. Remember this? He went viral. He got his friggin' 15 minutes. But he got up and started talking in the middle of the Supreme Court. And it's like, you're a friggin' college kid. These are the justices. Show them a little respect just because they are justices and we are in America, and make your case on the message board. It's just that primacy of emotion. I can't put it in rights as well as a real philosopher could. It's not my cup of tea, but your rights, I think, are not this never-ending thing to freedom of speech, wherever you want, however you want, without consequence.
So it seems like rights sort of impose different obligations on us than what we commonly think of them as. It seems like there's a notion out there that rights impose obligations on others, on others to be active in some way. Whereas it seems like it actually imposes a non-action, doesn't it? It imposes a sort of abstention. It's not activist. It's sort of passive. It's telling right instead of you have to basically stay out of another's way. If you're in a solemn event, the event and the people participating in it you don't have the right to assert yourself on them, but it's a non-assertive concept, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there was a time when I was younger, and I was Rand talks about this very explicitly, and definitely check out the lexicon. But in effect, your rights I'm paraphrasing now, but how I think about it is like, your rights don't cost anyone anything else. They don't infringe, and your exercise of your rights, they don't. And I would make the argument that, I mean, and Yaron talks about this quite a bit. Like, you want to speak out, you want to have a protest, rent Soldier Field, rent the Disney Center, pack 60,000 people there, Antifa, burn something, do an effigy. At least the Nazis back in, what was that, 33 or 34, they rented Madison Square Garden, right? They actually, they didn't just parade through the streets. And I know I don't want to touch that anything, but, your right to exercise your voice. And, I say the same thing in terms of when I think of people, for example, I joked when I introed you, Mark, but this idea that it's somehow cool now to get carried away with police, because they know that a police isn't going to hurt you too badly. They're really Daryl Hannah or any of these ones. It used to be very fashionable with the environmental stuff, but like it's such an insult because it's wasting everyone's time and money. So you asked, I can't answer explicitly about rights, but I think of it a bit in terms of property rights. Like, you have no right to disrupt someone else's event on their property. Go do it somewhere else, whether it's your house, whether it's your bar. And it's just also uncouth. It's just sad for America when you see America writ large, when that's the way they want to protest. It's just uncool. It's uncouth and it's uncool.
I agree with you now, but in this case, when it's on more or less federal property, when
we all own it,
right? We all own it. So these people, I don't think these people are thinking very deeply about that, but that might make them feel a sense of justification in expressing their own opinion. But I don't think people make those kinds of distinctions between private and public property anymore.
Yeah, look at these, look at the people who are getting arrested for trashing people's homes. They're affluent, and part of what Rand talks about, and people I think probably maybe get bored about it at some point, Mark, but it's like, oh, it's about ideas, because they're like, forget about ideas. What about the politics? What about this policy? What about Antifa? But like, where does Antifa or anyone else learn this? They're learning it in the schools. Go with your emotions. Hey, if you feel it, that's what matters. Maybe it's not right. Maybe it's a reason. Maybe it's in conflict with the reality or the context, but your feelings are what counts. So that's the thing that's more troubling. Whoever wins this election, whoever wins the short-term thing, the notion that the primacy of emotion is driving everything now is just, it's sad. I think for a country that was founded on reason, as you said, this idea that for the first time, it wasn't going to be about the king, the emperor, the priest. So it's a dark time for America in many ways, but I know we can bounce back.
Well,
with the right ideas.
That's true. That's a great book, by the way. And congratulations for putting it together.
Thank you.
So, I mean, why do you think we've gotten into this mess? And what's the solution?
Oh, let me ask you, you actually probably interact because, look, I left school. I dropped out of college. I really hated college, but I do think, as a lot of people in your own, especially as talked about, people basically make up their mind by a lot of these things, why do they feel this way? Certainly politically, those ideas are, formed when they're, 16 through 30, perhaps. You interact with a lot of these young people probably more than I do. I mean, it's literally been decades since I've been on a college campus. My audience are old people with money. So it's just a different world. So I don't know. I just think it comes down to getting them, there's that line from Evita, get them while they're young, Evita, get them while they're young. You have to, because by the time they're 30, they've already made up their mind that you're a selfish SOB and America was founded on slavery and whatever you're feeling is fine. So just lash out at the president because you hate the president. I hate the president, but to do it in this form and to do it like that, it speaks poorly of you. As a person, forget your politics. This is a person.
Yeah, there's certainly not a lot of introspection going on in all of these communities. It seems. I feel like,
did it bother you as much as the whole thing bother you as much as it kind of bothered me?
Well, unfortunately, I couldn't. I couldn't hear it.
I'm sorry.
So I only saw the visuals and saw the headlines. But and as much as I don't like Trump, I certainly think the lack of civility is is definitely the result of this primacy of emotion thing, and that it's creating a culture of malignant narcissists and sociopaths.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
confront them all the time. Either they want to rabble rouse because it turns them on, or they want to rabble rouse because that's their feelings and they think their feelings should be exercised irrespective of the context. And that's very scary. I mean, yes, it's true we have to catch them while they're young, but how do we change people who are in that realm where they've been more or less inoculated with these ideas? How can we turn them around from debate averse to interested in real diversity of thought? I mean,
Yeah.
I think this is something, if we don't know the answer to, we should find the answer to it as soon as possible.
Well, I mean, it's ultimately all about ideas. And, people say, well, we need Biden or Trump or this one or that one. And it's far too late. It's like now a couple generations and, of young people who are taught that this is okay. Then that's what's so frustrating for me, at least, Mark, is that these people who are, whether they're throwing the brick at Starbucks or whether they're booing President Trump or whether they're, I don't know, doing whatever the so-called right does, shooting paintball things, they would say that they have the moral high ground. A lot of objectivist philosophers always talk about people don't vote based on their pocketbook. Their politics is based on their morality. So they all would say, I did what was right. I spoke out against Trump. And, I guess for me, it comes back down to there's no appreciation, as you alluded to, for that greater context, that how lucky we are, whether you dislike today's politics, to at least know a little bit of what America's politics used to be about, and you're still part about something that's really amazing, and how fortunate we are to be in this country. And it's when I put a little bit of like, if you don't like it, leave it idea that like, if this country is so anathema in its current politics, you have to disrespect Ruth Bader, then you have to find someplace else, because we are still free, but to speak out in this kind of context, it was just so ugly and made me feel that people don't care about the look of America anymore, because there's still so much to love, even if you hate Trump.
Well, do you think? I think there's another element to this. We have the primacy of emotion that gives people the permission to act out whatever feelings they feel because they're legitimate. And then you have this old tradition of intellectuals that split the mind and the material world in two and gave us the superior intellectual spiritual world and the fallen material world, and made them at war with each other. So these people breaking store windows, stealing stuff, you hear them say it's just property. And I've heard, right. I've been called by activists trying to get money who don't understand the relationship between property and right, the relationship between your spiritual values and your material values. They don't understand that they're connected at all. How can we get them to understand that?
Well, I saw, actually, it's funny, Mark, you've got so much of diversity of experience. I happened to see the trailer for this new Aaron Sorkin production, what is it called? Chicago 6, about, the protesters from the Democratic Convention, Abby Hoffman among them. I've always vaguely known the story, but, they're presented really as, and you get this from the trailer, it's pretty good, they're presented as the moral heroes. Yes, there was some property destruction, and yes, there was some violence, but it was for ultimately a good cause. And, when I look at that, I feel like, that, and then certainly anything else, so whether it be disrespecting the president or breaking store windows, I say, you're no Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks sat in the back of a bus. She wasn't violating rights. She was sitting there like everyone else. I'm not an expert in the civil rights movement, but what we think of as now being moral in a political context, I just think of now as just being really uncouth, because ultimately it comes down to violating other people's rights.
And do you think it's that notion, that comparative notion of it's a higher cause? If we were to place causes within this spectrum of human life, so that it's either pro-life or anti-life, it's either pro-human thriving or anti-human thriving, there is no higher cause. The highest cause is human life, and what makes human life possible. So maybe it's about reframing the argument, because the left is simply adopting the old intellectual dichotomy, and they're very talented at spinning narratives based on that old intellectual dichotomy. Now let's change it. Let's take the dichotomy away and show the purpose of a cause should be human life and human thriving. And how do we achieve that then? In which case, Rosa Parks falls into that measurement, and the douchebag Antifa a-hole busting a window out at Starbucks, or somebody ripping off a Nike store, falls into the other category. And there's no justification then for emotional outbursts and burning property and injuring innocent people, because after all, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, and the omelet is what our goal is.
Yeah, I wrote an article for Dow Jones Newswires about how what bothered me about Kanye's interrupting Taylor Swift. Now, what was that, like 15 years ago? Was that was Taylor Swift's moment. I'm not comparing anything with the civil rights movement, but I'm saying, that was her moment. That was her property. And, Rand talks so beautifully. I mean, there's just so much in Rand about how important property rights are. And Mark, you're right. These days, property rights are like, property rights, just property. Like, that's someone's business. That was that was Taylor Swift's time. And Kanye just took it. I mean, I'll quickly tell the story, not to monotonous, but my old neighborhood, I've kind of moved to a different, but my old neighborhood has it was called SRO. It was a hot dog stand started by two brothers who were Chicago football and baseball fans, and their store was full of memorabilia, all kind of like Sammy Sosa, no one huge, but like Dale Sanders, recently, a lot of Chicago memorabilia stuff. Long story short, the first night of the major riots, Floyd, I don't remember what it was, the place was completely ruined. They were there for 27 years, and all the stuff was completely ruined. For what? For $300 in the cash till? Their whole business was ruined. And people say, oh, just property? That was their lives. That was their sort of lives. And it's so, so sad that there's that no respect for property right, no respect for the value of it, and how important property is to the right to your own life, which we should all value.
That's right. So we should now link the two. Your property is your life, and if you're stealing somebody's moment, that's an act of theft. I think we're out of time. Jonathan, do you mind closing down the show for us?
No, I'm so delighted to join you, Mark, and be with you, and I hope that we can be in person at one point, and always to be with the Ayn Rand Center. And thankful to all of our viewers for joining us each day. So we'll be back here tomorrow. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, everywhere else, and we'll see you next episode. Please share, and don't make the mistake I made in Europe. And it's not pasty, it's pasty. Is it pasty or pasty? I think I said the wrong one, whatever it was, but I'm going to learn it in time for the next show. We'll see you then. Bye.